Hello and welcome. Coming up tonight, how high will our energy bills rise? I'll ask the founder and boss of Octopus Energy, Greg Jackson. Why is the government blowing up the finances of the Reform Party? I'll ask the Housing Secretary, Steve Reed. The former National Security Advisor, Peter Ricketts, will tell me if he thinks Trump can end his devastating war against Iran anytime soon. And Pippa and McSweeney will look at how the government can protect our living standards.
They want to keep any support targeted. So who will they decide to help?
And throughout the show, two MPs united by their double-barrelled names, but disunited on almost everything else. Bell Ribeiro-Addy and Jacob Rees-Mogg. Gotcha. Now, I have good and bad news about the outlook for living standards. The good is that sometimes investors' markets are spectacularly wrong. An egregious example is that in the past few days, market prices have been signalling there could be a painful 4 interest rate rises over the coming 9 months to curb the inflation caused by Trump's Iran war. And Pippa will talk to you about all this in a minute or two. This has infuriated the executives and experts on the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee, led by the Governor, Andrew Bailey, whose expectation, as I understand it, is that the most likely path for interest rates in coming months is they stay where they are. And since they set interest rates, that sort of matters. The point is that Trump's war makes everyone so gloomy that the disinflation from a slowing economy will take the edge off the inflation caused by the oil price surge. The bad news, though, is bad. It's that oil and gas prices are likely to remain elevated for months, even if Trump's putative peace talks aren't a figment of his imagination, because too much damage has already been done to energy infrastructure and the Hormuz Strait won't be reopened quickly. So the risks are serious of disrupted supply chains, contagion to critical manufacturing and even worse, financial markets chaos than we've experienced already. Trump has been the bringer of this mayhem, so maybe don't send him an Easter egg this year. Pippa.
Ordinary Brits certainly won't want to give him one, and Rachel Reeves might not either. Here's why. The Bank of England held rates at 3.75% last week, but expectations on where they go next vary hugely. This chart shows how they've changed since 2023. The purple line shows what the markets thought would happen to interest rates before the war. One cut to 3.5% and a 50% chance of a further cut this year. Good news for mortgage holders. But by Monday, as Trump's deadline for striking Iranian energy plants approached, the markets projected 3 hikes by the end of the year, the green line up to 4.5%. And now, with talks ongoing, at least according to the White House, it's 3 hikes by the end of next year. Now, Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer said that they'd pull any levers necessary to limit the impact on energy bills. The Chancellor said it would be more targeted than in the past. So what might it look like? This chart shows how much people benefit from different proposals across the income distribution. Reeves has already moved some green levies off bills, which she thinks can save 150 quid a year. The Resolution Foundation think they can save households a further 130. This helps everybody the same amount, the blue line here, but some higher income households marginally more. Another option, the green line here, is to bring in a social tariff, with the unit price of energy subsidised for those on the lowest incomes. But I'm told that the government doesn't have a mechanism for this yet. So they might have to focus their support for people on welfare, which Kemi Badenoch described at PMQs as the bailout for benefits. The Res Foundation modelled a boost to universal credit of £8.60 per week. As you can see, that's still quite progressive. But each of these options would cost £3.7 billion a year. So the government's waiting to see how long the conflict goes on and how much it can afford.
Thanks, Pippa. Belle, if I could just pick up with you. I mean, obviously, we still can't be confident what the energy price will be in July and in the autumn when the resetting of our bills takes place. But we already know, the Chancellor said this, Prime Minister said this, that they want the support to be targeted. Yeah. How worried are you, though, that quite a lot of struggling families and indeed struggling pensioners will miss out?
I mean, it's always a worry when you target that there are people that may just be over or under a particular line or not in a particular scheme, which means that they miss out. But I think not doing anything at all is the worst thing ever. So many people are going to be impacted by these different fluctuations, and I think it's right for the government to make a move. Even if they're not helping absolutely everybody, we've got to help as many people as we can.
I mean, you were in the Liz Truss government that allocated, well, in total, it was about £80 billion to the energy bailout.
I was the energy secretary.
Sorry?
I was the energy secretary at the time.
And I mean, the convention, even in your own party now, is that that was a mistake. Do you think it was a mistake?
The degree to which prices had gone up was absolutely extraordinary and on a different magnitude from what's happened now.
It's true, but you nonetheless gave
hold on,
quite a lot of money to people who were quite well off.
Let me finish.
Yeah.
Because energy prices, gas prices gone up ninefold. Now, there was basically no business in the country that could cope with a ninefold increase in its energy prices, and the number of households that could cope with it was very, very small. So small that it would have been administratively more expensive to take them out than to leave them in. So I think people who are saying that was a mistake just forget quite how extreme it was. At the moment, the price increase is broadly within the lines of where prices have been over the last couple of years. It's much too early to be talking about a bailout. If this war doesn't go on for months, if the Straits of Hormuz open up, and if Iran comes to some peace deal, we could see more oil coming into the market and prices declining, because Iran goes from being a sanctioned country that can only sell to China to one that enters the global market. So it's much too early to be talking about this. I think the government should be patient, and that the price rises currently forecast are simply within the bounds of ordinary market fluctuations. Petrol prices are not higher than they were a couple of years ago. We've been very lucky petrol prices had been falling, but you can't expect that to happen forever.
I think in government, it can only ever be the right thing to do to help those that may be in need. And at the moment, we are in a serious cost of living crisis. So whatever the amount's going to be, some people are going to be
talking about a 30% rise in the typical bill that's being paid. And if you're at the bottom end of the income spectrum,
that's significant, yeah.
That's very hard to afford.
But you've got to be careful about taking forecasts as being accurate. When the price went up ninefold, people thought it was staying at that ninefold level. There were people who were trying to persuade me as energy secretary to make contracts at that new level going into decades ahead. And there was a brilliant civil servant who made sure that didn't happen. It would have cost the country billions. You mustn't panic when prices initially rise. This could all change. Prices could be lower than they currently are in 3 weeks, let alone in 3 months. It's much too early.
Okay,
I'd also say, just one final point, if I may, that at the moment, people who are earning are suffering from fiscal drag. Their tax threshold is frozen, and that is paying for people on benefits to get an inflation-linked increase in their benefits. That is not fair on people on low incomes who are taxpayers. They're losing £703 a year already from 2021 to 2026 on fiscal drag.
I'm going to come back to you in a minute, Belle, but I've got to tell you, Jacob, if we, within 3 weeks, get to significantly lower oil and gas prices, I will eat your hat as well as my own hat, to be perfectly honest, but we'll have to see. I mean, you are an expert in all of this, right? It is true that futures prices are not as high as the current market price, but where do you expect us to be in July and September, October when it comes to energy prices?
First of all, I think that was a great conversation. The reality at the moment is wholesale prices for gas are roughly double where they were a few weeks ago, but they're a quarter of where they were at the peak of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
That's right.
If this conflict is over quickly, what we may well see is a significant but manageable price rise. By manageable, I mean nowhere near the magnitude we saw before in July. So perhaps it'll be £300 annualised, but it could be just for a few months. It might be £80, and because it's the summer, people use half the power, so it'd be about £40 potentially impact. If it goes on for a lot longer and we can't get energy through the Strait of Hormuz, we need to be ready for a prolonged period of higher prices. Yeah. And I think, therefore, what the government would be right to be doing is to be using this time now to contingency plan contingency plan for what happens if it becomes prolonged or worse, but also keeping this in perspective. I think the other thing...
But just as, you know, boss of Octopus, I think are you now the biggest supplier of energy in the UK?
We are.
So when you heard Fatih Birol, the head of the Institute... the energy... the IEA, I can't remember what those... Anyway, the Institute for...
IEA.
Yeah, the IEA. I can, for some reason, on my brain, I'm having a brain freeze, and I can't remember what it stands for. But nonetheless, they are the leading energy forecasters, and he said this was the worst crisis, well, pretty much ever in energy markets, and he said it was as bad as putting together the 270s crises and the Ukraine crisis. It doesn't sound as though you think that's right.
Well, first of all, I'm purely looking from the domestic fuels, oil, gas, electricity. I genuinely just don't know enough about oil, and he'll be looking at the whole picture.
Yeah.
But if you're looking right now, what really matters are two things. One is how quickly it's over, and the other is the extent of any permanent damage, particularly from a gas perspective, in Qatar that takes a lot of years to repair. Right now, you know, frankly, each point things could have changed. They've gone for worse, not better. But the picture still looks like it, you know, it's within the bounds of manageability, but that could change. What I would say, Robert, is first of all, you know, it's also right we're in a cost of living crisis, and the reality is there's a whole load of stuff in our energy bills today that could be stripped away to help tackle the underlying cost of energy.
So one of the things that you've talked to me about in the past is you think that the government is spending too much on building out the network. What is that? What do you mean by that? Because we've got all these renewables online, and we've got to connect them to the grid. So what are they doing wrong, and how can you save money?
Well, first of all, we should be saying it's good news that the government took some of those levies off electricity bills. We've been asking for that for a long time. It makes a big difference. It means that right now, despite all the stuff we're talking about, we're emailing millions of customers, telling them that bills are going to be lower across April, May and June. And, you know, that's making a big difference. It shows what a difference it can make when you tackle this. Now, when you talk about that grid, you know, the UK electricity consumption is currently 20 or 25% lower than it was 20 years ago. And yet we're planning to build £100 billion or thereabouts of new grid and new networks. Now, half the networks at the moment are not even properly metered, and yet we're planning on upgrading them. When the world changes, we need to stop and say, if we delayed those plans, if we could cancel some, we could replace some with technology. There are technologies now that means we can make our existing network do an awful lot more.
So why aren't we doing that?
Because there's a huge momentum within bureaucracies that means that plans they started 10 years ago, they're finally getting to the point of fruition. But in those 10 years, technology's changed, anticipated increase in consumption hasn't come, and we've found that the new forms of consumption, things like electric cars, don't add to our peak load because we can choose when to charge a car. Now, if you're not adding to your peak load, you don't need any new grid. So what we need to do now is say, look, reassess all those grid plans, all those network plans, like scrap things like carbon capture storage that maybe 5 or 10 years ago looked like it might have been worth pursuing. But what we've learned is the technology just hasn't got there.
And it's extraordinarily expensive.
We're planning on spending 20 billion as a nation on it. The point really being, when you run any large organisation, if you look at your financial situation, you change your decisions based on changing technologies, changing markets and changing finances.
And can I just ask, in terms of if support is necessary for those on low incomes, are you one of those who believes what we should have is a so-called social tariff where basically it's given out depending on your income, or do you think the government is just going to have to stick to the data it's got, which is those who get universal credit and those who get pension credit, and just allocate it on that basis?
The harsh reality with electricity bills in particular is they've been a dumping ground for policy for decades. And so all the time, we all look at them and say, they're too big, we need to find ways to get them down. But then we keep putting these social policies on. So each policy may or may not seem attractive in itself. But the cumulative effect is we've got this huge kludge that means that when we come to times like now, with a genuine crisis, we're doing it against a background where we're already dealing with a lot of bloat. So a social tariff sounds great until you ask how it's going to be paid for and how it's going to work, and then everybody disagrees. To me, first of all, we should be pushing our energy bills down, and we have a benefit system, a tax and benefit system to deal with distribution. That's the right place to do a lot of this stuff. And
so just take it out of the bill-paying system.
Look, the more we can have cleaner energy bills, where companies and households are paying as little as possible, and it's clear how we can keep them under control.
Yeah.
And then we use the other parts of the social welfare system to do the very important job it does.
Now, a lot of the political argument is around what we do about the oil and gas in the North Sea, and I'm hoping that your data comes from the International Energy Agency, because I would be struggling to remember what the hell they're called, but I bet it's not.
I'm sure we can say it is. But at PMQs today, there was a noisy debate about whether we should be drilling more oil and gas from the North Sea to soften the blow of the energy crisis. This chart shows how much oil and gas we've extracted over the years and how much is left under the sea. As you can see, we've already pumped out 48 billion barrels. That's more than 90% of what was in the ground. That means there's only 3.6 billion barrels left. Not much. And it doesn't raise that much for the Treasury. Researchers at the University of Oxford, sorry, Robert, not at the IEA, estimate it would bring in 47 billion quid in tax revenue. But when you split that across all households in the UK and over the 20-year lifespan of the reserves, it works out at just £82 off each year. That's just 4.6% off the average energy bill. Greg, is it even worth it?
Well, I think it's a distraction in these conversations. Either way, the reality is at the moment we do ship gas around the world to the UK, and doing so is wasteful. It takes a huge amount of energy to compress it, to get it into the ships. To keep it compressed, you're losing 1% of it every day, and it takes a load to decompress it at the end. Plus, it's leaky of methane, and methane's a pretty nasty greenhouse gas. So, to the extent we can use gas, using it from the North Sea, I'm totally relaxed about. But the reality is the UK is part of the European gas network, which itself is fully open to a global network. So our price will still be set globally. Nobody's going to be giving us cheap gas in the UK from the North Sea when they can sell it at a higher price in the market. So the big thing we have to do is recognise the UK cannot be self-sufficient in gas anymore. And the best way to prevent these periodic, these Groundhog Day crises, is to electrify our economy as quickly as possible. We'll still be using gas for decades to come, but every turn of a wind turbine blade reduces our gas consumption. A heat pump powered entirely by electricity generated from gas uses less gas than a gas boiler, right? And an electric car, even if all the electricity came from gas, has lower emissions than a petrol car. So electrification of the economy is the right long-term trend. And in the meanwhile, this kind of discussion's a bit of distraction. But did you notice that Kemi Badenoch cited you today as backing her position on opening up the North Sea? Yeah, and I mean it. Look, at the end of the day, the more you look at liquid natural gas, the way we ship it around the world, the more you realise that less of that would be a good thing.
So, do you agree with that, Belle?
I agree that it's definitely a distraction. I don't think we should be looking at drilling more at all. It doesn't even... Even if,
you know, you've heard Greg say that actually it's bad for the climate, shipping all this gas from somewhere else.
Yeah, shipping it is really bad for the environment, which is why we should be looking into more renewables. We've had such a huge setback. The previous government wasn't very interested.
But the problem is it takes a long time to get from where we are today to a fully renewable economy. Yeah, and we are therefore going to be very, very vulnerable to these market shocks.
It does, but where there's a will, there's a way. And I think that we're moving too slowly. And in fact, even if we were to move forward with that, 80% of it's already being sold elsewhere anyway. Even if we were to nationalise it's not a real starter. It's not going to make a massive difference.
But, it will make it, 47 billion of tax revenues is quite a lot of tax that the Exchequer's not getting, isn't it?
It's not significant enough given the environmental impact and what we need. Sorry, I know you're asking him, but I'll finish. And given what we need to do in terms of renewables, it's just not significant enough.
Jacob?
It's also much more than 47 billion because
Why?
people only have proved and probable reserves when they think they're likely to make an investment. They don't prove the reserves until they're working on an investment. And you always find with all oil exploration anywhere in the world that reserves are much bigger than people forecast because they're only forecasting for the next immediate production. And
you're sort of Candide on all of these things, aren't you?
No, this is true. Greg will know about this, that it is just a fact of searching for fossil fuels that you only spend the money on proving what you're going to be extracting in the near future. There's no point in paying money for things the years ahead. So you know that's a minimum rather than a maximum. I'm strongly in favour of hydraulic fracturing, shale gas, where we are sitting on trillions of cubic feet of gas, and we should be extracting that. We should, of course, use our reserves. What Greg is saying about the emissions from liquefied gas is absolutely spot on. And this money then comes into the United Kingdom economy rather than going abroad. And
so you're not remotely worried about the mini earthquakes and all the environmental problems?
The mini earthquakes are less than you get from a fall in a disused coal mine of rock. They are not earthquakes. They are minor things. They're like a lorry going past outside your front door. And because they are called earthquakes, people think of San Francisco in the early 1900s. This is simply not earthquake territory. And this is very well established. There's very good papers on this that have been published. So I would strongly favour fracking, but we should also think about coal. We've got a lot of coal. We're making no difference to emissions. We are 0.9% of global emissions. We need cheap
I've got to go back to Greg for a minute because he hasn't got that much time. But so fracking and coal?
The reality is the future's electric. Electrification, the technology behind that are improving exponentially. The technologies of burning stuff are not getting any better. So the reason I'm relaxed about where we get our gas from is it's the burning that's the problem, and we need to burn less stuff. Now, the reality is the economies that are investing in the technology of electrification over the next decade are going to end up making the economies that are going back to fossil fuels look like middle-income countries. And it's a huge risk for us as we sit here having this debate. But look, if you go to China now, not only are more than half the cars that are sold there electric, not only are all the two-wheel vehicles, the taxis in big cities, the buses, 25% of the HGVs are now electric, right? That's the pace of change. And by the way, of course, we'll hear, oh, yes, but China burns all this coal. The reality is 75% of all the renewables being built in the world today are being built in China, right? Larry Fink talked about these vast solar and wind farms they're now building as they move away, initially from oil, now from coal. And to put it in perspective, the Chinese state oil company reckons that by 2040, they'll have no petrol stations, right? Now, we are going to look like a backward country if we're going back to burning more stuff rather than taking on these technologies. They're not only cleaner, they're more efficient, they're vastly more versatile. They're even the new weapons of war. You know, what are all the Ukrainian drones, ground-based, land-based, air-based? It's all power, it's all the technology of electricity.
Yeah, I mean, so on that basis, Belle, do you think actually this government is moving fast enough to electrify?
Well, I wish they would move even faster. I mean, the reason why we're in this situation is because we're on this roller coaster of fossil fuel dependency. And until we fling ourselves off it, things aren't going to change. I'm not sure about the weapons, but I think everything else has been proven that if we move much faster towards renewable energy, we can put ourselves in a situation where we don't have to depend on anyone else, where we're not going to be in a situation where whenever Trump decides to start a war, we're in trouble.
I'm going to come back to you in a minute, Jake, if you forgive me, because I'm delighted to be joined by the former National Security Advisor, Lord Ricketts, Peter Ricketts. I mean, the cause of all this energy spike that we've been talking about is the war, Trump's war in Iran. He keeps saying he's basically won. Is there any substance to that?
Well, he hasn't achieved any of his objectives. I mean, he could any day say, I've won, stop the bombing and make the best case he can for a historic victory.
Well, how much chaos would there be in the region if he did that?
Well, for a start, it's not sure that Israel would stop firing at Iran or Iran replying. That could go on for some time. Even when they stop, Iran will still have its chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz. And they're not going to give that up. So, yes, Trump can declare victory, but he doesn't get to choose when this war ends. And I think it could go on some time yet.
And in terms of the Middle Eastern countries dragged into it, whether it's Saudi or Bahrain or Oman or the rest, when they have a moment's break from all of this, are they going to stick as allies of America, or are they likely to gravitate to China, as some believe?
Well, they've got some serious thinking to do, absolutely. I mean, they're furious with Iran, of course, but I don't think they're going to start attacking Iran. And I think it may vary between Gulf states. Some will decide they need to find a way of getting closer to Iran again, countries like Oman, perhaps. The Saudis will need to do some thinking about how strong is the alliance with America. They started this war. they were not able to protect Saudi Arabia fully from the drones and the missiles. China has held itself aloof, ready to be the country of stability and international order, and we might see.
And it's a big buyer of oil and gas.
The big buyer, and the Saudis might even begin to think about, well, perhaps we need a nuclear weapon as well. So I think there's quite a lot of rethinking to be done in the Gulf, given how vulnerable they've turned out to be, how effective the Iranian levers are. These are asymmetric levers, closing the Strait of Hormuz, firing into the oil fields and the gas field. We've already seen one attack took out 17% of Qatar's ability to produce gas. That's going to take a long time to repair. So major rethinking needed in the Gulf, I think.
Peter, there's more I need to ask you. There's much more I also need to talk to Jacob and Belle about. So come back in a minute or two.
Welcome to the break. Now, this is our last programme in the studio, which we've been in for, or Robert's been in for 8 years before we moved to our...
10 years altogether.
10 years altogether, but 8 years this studio, before we moved to our new studios. So we're going to we've taken a look back at our very first show here on 26th of September 2018. And we'd like you to fill in the blanks from Robert's first opening monologue, which was... Corbyn's week was hijacked by the quiet man of the front bench. Name? Belle, can you remember who it might have been? 2018, who caused a stir at conference? I know you know.
No, I don't. I've got no memory of this.
Party conference in 2018, something to do with Labour retaining the option of staying in the European Union. So that receiving a standing ovation.
Oh, I know who it is now.
Oh, no.
Jacob?
No.
It was Keir Starmer.
Oh, I was going to say it was obviously Keir Starmer.
A long time. So, Belle, what did you make of Starmer back then?
He was very pro-Remain.
He was very pro-Remain.
He was very pro-Remain.
OK, the next one. So this is, it would see steam coming out of... So this is discussing the Brexit compromise, I should say, that Corbyn made to Theresa May. And Robert said that the suggestion of giving up the right to do free trade deals would see the steam coming out of the ears of X, Y and Z. Jacob, who do you think those
they people,
MPs
because that could be something
might be?
else.
Bill Cash, John Redwood, and me.
So 1 out of 3 is right. You were one of them. Who do we think the other big levers, Brexit?
You were on the first show.
Mark Francois.
No, wrong again. Boris Johnson and David Davis. Do you still stand by your position?
On Brexit, of course I do, but
Really?
steam never comes out of my ears, let me tell you. I managed to keep the temperature down.
Now we're going to guess the guest round. Let's see if you can identify some of the guests or one of the guests from our first show. Which former politician who launched their own app, that's the clue, in 2018 featured on the programme?
Matt Hancock.
Matt Hancock, the Matt Hancock app, obviously a great favourite of everybody. He was designed to keep his constituents, open space to his constituents. Next question. Which former politician revealed during the programme that they get a cameo in The Bodyguard? Great series.
Oh, I
if
know
there was
this.
a second series.
I know this.
Robert knows. Go on then.
It's Amber, isn't it?
Amber Rudd, Home Secretary, former Home Secretary at the time, said she was a fan of the show and revealed that the show's writer, Jed Mercurio, had offered her a cameo role if there was a second series. How about that? OK, so Jacob, as a friend of the show, you've been here for many of these programmes. Do you have a standout moment from our time in the studio?
Well, I got a Geek of the Week badge on one occasion.
You did?
So
What for?
I can't remember what I did to deserve it.
What did you do?
Can't remember, but I've still got it. It was a treasured possession. I had it in my
Knowledge
House
of
Commons
parliamentary
office for
procedure,
years.
perhaps. Sounds a bit controversial
You're one
to
of the
me.
few who hasn't
A bit
sold
of
it
a
on eBay.
stitch-up.
Well done.
And Belle, the same for you. Are there any standout memories?
Do you know, there was someone who I was with, and I can't remember who it was, but I was talking to you about this earlier, who was convinced that renewables were bad. He basically was saying that the wind wouldn't blow and the sun wouldn't shine.
There we go.
Well,
Same
wasn't
for
me,
you
was
two.
No, it
Perfect.
wasn't. It wasn't.
Thanks very much, both of you.
Welcome back. We're going to be talking Iran with Peter Ricketts again in a minute, but first, Pippa.
Yeah, there's some tweets here. So obviously Americans are saying that there are productive talks with Iran. But this is what the Iranians are saying, Iran's foreign minister. The fact that they're now talking about negotiations is an admission of defeat. Didn't they claim unconditional surrender before? I suppose it also doesn't help that America has deployed lots of troops into the region, not normally the actions of somebody who is also claiming that the conflict is over.
Thanks, Pippa. So, Peter, we've had these very conflicting narratives from America and Iran about what's actually going on. What do you... I mean, who do we believe? What kind of talks are taking place?
I mean, less is going on than Trump would have you believe, I'm sure. I mean, every time Trump says that Iran is desperate for a settlement, the Iranians take that as weakness on his part. And they, are determined, I think, to see this through. I guess what's happening is bits of paper are being exchanged through intermediaries. The 15-point plan, echoes of the 20-point plan in Gaza, I think is a rehash of what existed before the first bombing of Iran 15 months ago. The Iranians have come back with 5 points, which are clearly a maximalist bid. Neither have any hope of being agreed. It's a dialogue of the deaf. And I mean, Trump is talking it up for his own reasons, no doubt to do with the markets. But I don't think we're anywhere near a negotiation.
So what does Trump has set a deadline of the end of this week for bombing, critical infrastructure, critical energy production sites in Iran. Is he going to carry out that threat? Or does he find another reason to delay?
I mean, he set a deadline of 3 days to bomb the power stations, and then the market reaction, I think, led him to very rapidly, go into reverse gear. Again, the Iranians will see that as weakness, unwillingness to see it through. No, I don't think he is, because I think the Iranians certainly would then retaliate with yet further strikes on the Gulf oil industries, perhaps the desalination plants. And whenever we got to that point, Trump has backed away from it. So I don't think he will. I mean, the other threat that's out there is the Marines steaming towards the area.
Yeah, what do you think? I mean, these Marines are quite close now. What's he going to do with them? Are they going to take Karg Island?
I mean, I doubt it. I mean, they could. They could militarily take Karg Island, but then he's really in the quagmire. Has he learnt nothing from Iraq 2003? The Iranians would certainly start attacking American troops. Body bags would start going back to the USA. His popularity would plunge further. It might well cost the Republicans the midterm elections.
I mean, if you were wearing your National Security Advisor hat and you were advising the Prime Minister, so there's two questions. One is, how long would you say to him this war of attrition is going to continue for?
I think I'd say that the war of attrition probably doesn't have all that much longer to run, but the fact
days,
of the
weeks, or
week, 2 weeks, something like that.
Right.
And that's the sort of time length that the Israelis have been talking about. Of course, the Israelis and the Americans have different priorities here.
Yeah.
Trump wants a deal. The Israelis want to smash Iran as far as possible so that it will never be a threat again. But even when the war of attrition finishes, as I said, the Iranians will hold the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah.
They are now deciding, filtering which ships will go through, depending on who's prepared to pay or who...
And just
they
to
reckon
be
is on their
clear,
side.
it would be too risky for a country like the UK to get involved in policing the Strait at that juncture. If it's simply the end of the war of attrition, but the Iranians plainly still control the Strait, we shouldn't send any
No.
military boats, whatever, in.
No, I mean, the Americans are not rushing to do that job, and they have a vastly stronger navy than we do. I mean, if the Iranians are still saying, we control the Straits, we will decide who goes through. If you go through against our wishes, we'll fire at you. I don't think any Western country is going to put a warship there. You're just a few kilometres from that coast. Any projectile will be a risk, not just sophisticated missiles, but drones or artillery shells or little boats with bits of explosive on them. It is too dangerous unless there's a degree of acceptance by Iran that shipping is going to pass, in which case maybe escorting to give the ship owners confidence and insurance rates bring down. But in any hostile circumstances, I don't think Britain or anybody else is prepared to put their warships there.
Just on that, if it sort of calms down significantly, what role should Britain play after that, Belle?
I mean, I worry about the role we're already playing. Obviously, we've said that we're staying out of it. However, our bases are still being used in a significant way. Our role should only ever be to try and stabilise things and help promote peace in the region. The worry is that we're too close to the US, and it feels like whatever we're going to do is going to be on their terms, and that then creates problems and makes it difficult for us, I think, to be credible in terms of holding or attempting to be a force for peace in the area.
I mean, Jacob, do you agree that, if the severity of the bombing really does diminish, is there a role for Britain?
Well, I think our national interest and our national security is dependent upon being close to the United States, regardless of who the President of the United States is. And that has been an overriding British national interest now for a very long time. It's very difficult when the President of the United States does something that the British government doesn't in principle support. But the overwhelming interest of this country is to maintain close to the United States. So we need to be ready to do things that will be helpful. We've been absolutely right to make the bases available, and in my view should have done so earlier because of our dependence on the United States.
And very quickly, Peter, is there anything constructive that we can do to essentially bring a more orderly end to this?
Well, Britain's classic role in these circumstances is to think about the future. When the fighting stops, how can we begin to get a dialogue going in the Gulf, between the Gulf countries and Iran, and involving America as well? It's not going to be happening quickly. We have got to protect the relationship with the US, as Jacob says. I think the way to look at that is it's like an iceberg. 7/8 of it is underwater. That's the deep state where we are cooperating on defence and intelligence. The 1/8 above the water, which is where the political rhetoric is flying, is showing what a gap in values and interests has actually opened up between us and the US. And that's going to be a problem for the future as well.
Thanks, Peter. Great to talk to you as ever. Now, I'm afraid I'm about to engage in what you might call a bit of a handbrake turn. Earlier on, I spoke to the Housing Secretary, Steve Reed, and he today announced a ban on all cryptocurrency donations to political parties because he's fearful that could lead to foreign interference. He also said donations from British people living abroad to political parties shouldn't be more than £100,000. Now, given that the Reform UK are the main beneficiaries of those sorts of donations, I asked the Housing Secretary, Steve Reed, whether the fact that they'd made this ban was simply because Keir Starmer is absolutely terrified of Nigel Farage.
That just isn't true. What happened is I asked Philip Rycroft, a senior former civil servant, completely neutral when it comes to party politics, to take a look at whether the safeguards we have around our democratic system are robust enough to withstand the new attempts by hostile foreign states to use channels like cryptocurrency to funnel money in to try and influence the outcome of our general elections. Now, what Philip has recommended...
Actually, but just while you talk about the list of bad actors, I was really struck that Philip Rycroft himself said private citizens, foreign actors from allies like the United States have the potential or indeed may already be abusing our politics. So, what kind of a world is it where we don't even trust Americans?
Well, we have to safeguard British elections for British people, wherever the threat may come from. So I think it is in the interests of Reform, Labour, Tories, Lib Dems, Greens, all of us want to make sure that we cannot be used to funnel dark money into British politics. And these changes ensure that we're guaranteeing the integrity of British elections into the future.
Some of your colleagues have said to me that they are disappointed with what they see as one omission. They don't like the fact that any wealthy individual or institution can buy influence, and they wanted you to put a cap on a maximum donation from anybody. And they say, and they shrug, and they say, well, the reason you won't do that is because you are so dependent on union donations, you daren't put a cap on individual donations.
Well, I'm not trying to stop British people donating in British elections.
In any sum. So you don't mind if it's millions and millions and millions?
We're trying to make sure... Well, we don't have state funding of political parties in this country, and the British public don't want it. So parties have to raise funds somehow, and surely all of us believe that British governments should be chosen by British people and British people alone.
So don't go away, because after the break I will talk to Steve Reed about the greatest mystery gripping Westminster at the moment, which is what happened to the former Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney's mobile phone. See you in a minute.
Welcome to the break. Now, Peter, you are the government's special envoy for the loan of the Bayeux Tapestry to the British Museum this year. So in honour of this historic loan, we've created some Bayeux illustrations of our own, not woven, sadly, featuring modern political moments, and we'd like you to identify what they are. So I'll give you a second to get your glasses on.
Put my glasses on.
The first one, I'm sure Jacob and Belle can help with this one. The first one, what do we reckon this is? Who's this guy dropping all his papers? Someone else picking them up? Anyone know?
Yeah, it's Trump and Starmer.
Donald Trump dropping his papers and Keir Starmer, of course, picking them up. How's the Latin? Does it work? What does that say?
Oh, I don't know.
He's not a Latin scholar.
No.
OK. Jacob, who do we think this might be?
Oh, that's the mayor of Lincolnshire.
Andrew Jenkins?
Andrew Jenkins, who sang God Save the King at the Reform Party conference.
Insomnia. She sang Insomnia, her own self-song. Insomniac, sorry.
Oh, did she? Right.
Some persona che dormire non protest. I'd like to know what that means, but I didn't study Latin either. So, Belle, I don't know if you're a classic
I've
scholar.
got a few of those words.
And this one for Belle, or indeed Peter and Jacob can join in as well. Who do you think this might be? Look closely at the fella on the stage there, addressing the large crowd. The large crowd, they look like they might be wanting to dance or sing.
Is it meant to be
Medieval
Jeremy?
Music Festival.
Is it meant to be Jeremy?
It's supposed to be Jeremy
At
addressing
Glastonbury?
Glastonbury. Brilliant. Belle gets it right. OK, another one for Peter. You must get this one. Who do you reckon this is?
It looks to me very much like Boris Johnson in attack mode and the famous battle bus.
Indeed, or the battle chariot.
Pounds a month.
Exactly.
A day.
The battle chariot, it looks like there,
Where's
doesn't
the
it?
money,
Very good.
OK,
Jacob?
Jacob and Belle.
You've got it.
Who about this one? Don't recognise this fella. What do you reckon, Jacob? Who's that?
I can't think who that could possibly be.
Belle? Any ideas?
It's Jacob Rees-Mogg.
It's me.
Reclining during
I'm
Brexit debate. Jacob, how do you feel about having become a meme?
You tell me what a meme is, and I'll tell you how I feel about it.
So basically, we were all sending it round on our phones.
Have you got better things to do?
Apparently not.
Oh, dear. I don't mind at all. I think it's all very jolly.
Peter?
Well, who else could it possibly be but a super relaxed politician in a moment of somnolence?
Are you excited for the Bayeux Tapestry coming to London?
But it's in the green benches, not the red ones, so that's a
Yes,
giveaway.
that is true. Green bench is a giveaway. And are you excited about the Bayeux Tapestry coming to London?
Yeah, isn't that a wonderful thing in a world of disorder to have this object? The first time in 1,000 years it's been back to the UK.
Amazing.
It's an 11th century comic strip that talks to children directly and tells a foundational story of our history, far more so than in France. It's not it's not that popular in France.
We'll all make sure we go and see it.
It's an absolute
brilliant.
must
Thank
go
you.
and see it
Thank
in
you
the
very much.
British Museum.
I must see, Peter says.
Welcome back now. Before we pursue the mystery of Morgan McSweeney's stolen mobile phone, Pippa has some clues.
Well, lots of people get their phones nicked in London. So why has one theft had so much attention? We found out at the weekend that Morgan McSweeney, Keir Starmer's former Chief of Staff, had his pinched last year. This is a problem because it contained sensitive information, including messages to Peter Mandelson about his appointment. The Conservatives successfully compelled the government to publish all the background around the selection of the former US ambassador. As spelt out here, that included electronic communications between the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and Lord Mandelson, documents yet to be released. Now, Downing Street and the Met have become embroiled in a blame game over why the force did not properly investigate. Scotland Yard said McSweeney did not fully disclose his job when he reported the theft on 999. Number 10 said he told them it was a government phone. Once again, it's very messy.
Thanks so much, Pippa. Now, obviously, I asked Steve Reed about this, given that he worked very closely with Morgan McSweeney for quite a long time. And in an interview this weekend, he said that Morgan McSweeney's phone was stolen about a year before Mandelson was even sacked as ambassador, and a year before all those emails came out showing how close he was, how friendly he was with Epstein. So I pointed out that on the basis of what we learned today from the Metropolitan Police, that simply wasn't true.
I don't have any particular insights into what goes on with other people's phones, to be honest.
So why did you say that? So why did you say that?
Well, I know his phone got stolen last year, and I know that Parliament passed the humble address this year asking for communications to be published. So therefore,
it was stolen.
months before...
No, hang on. It was stolen after Kemi Badenoch had already started to say that all the communications should be published.
It was before the humble address was earlier this year. Sure. That was the mechanism in Parliament that required communications to be published, and it was in the previous year that Morgan's phone had got stolen. All I will say is
people will note that it was stolen at a very convenient time for Morgan McSweeney. But the one thing that I'm not clear about is, has the government been able to identify that communication that he had with Mandelson? Is there a backup?
I wouldn't have any idea. I don't keep a track on what happens to other people's phones.
Well, has Downing Street briefed you on? Because this is, one of the biggest stories of the moment. Before coming on, didn't they tell you whether or not they got a backup of these conversations?
I know the government is doing everything they can to make sure that all communications are published in line with the requirement through from Parliament. But I do know that when the phone was stolen, Morgan reported it to Number 10, and therefore the security services will have been alerted. And that was before any decision by Parliament to publish communications. So that's all there is to it. Now, people are trying to make more of it than that, but I'm afraid I can't give you any more because that's what I know.
But don't you understand, you were elected on a platform of cleaning up politics after, years, some people would say, of a lot of dodginess going on by the past government. Do you not understand why people so mistrust you on this issue?
Well, I can see what you're trying to insinuate, but the fact that someone has their phone snatched out of their hand in the street and reports it to the police on Number 10 doesn't seem to back up your allegation.
Well, hang on a second. You've seen the transcript of his conversation with the police, which the Met Police felt obliged to put out because the Met Police put it out because nowhere in that conversation does it say this phone contains highly sensitive data and it's a matter of national security. Why wouldn't Morgan McSweeney tell the police that?
I believe he gave them his name, and I believe he said it was a government phone, and I believe he reported it to Number 10, and Number 10 has direct connections with the security services. So I'm afraid people are trying to make a story out of something that didn't exist. The guy got his phone snatched out of his hand and reported it in the right way.
Well, we'll know whether there's a story there or not when we discover whether or not, in the normal kind of way, sensitive information was backed up and whether it's ever published.
Well, those are allegations and speculation. I can see why it makes it a story.
It's a straightforward statement. You have an obligation to publish this stuff. If it's vanished, I'm afraid people will not be happy.
Well, that's right. But, the circumstances are what I just described, as far as I know.
All right. Steve, as always, very good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us today. So there we are. We just heard from Steve Reed, who's a mate of Morgan McSweeney's, and he's a member of the Cabinet. He hasn't got a clue whether any of Morgan McSweeney's messages to Peter Mandelson exist or are in the government's hands. But, Pippa, you know more than he does, apparently.
Well, it sounds like it. I mean, there's been intense scrutiny about the whereabouts of these messages, and I can reveal to you, Robert, that the Cabinet Office does, in fact, hold some of the messages, both texts from the phone and emails between Peter Mandelson and Morgan McSweeney, and that they will be released in the next tranche of documents that we're expecting at some point after Easter as a result of the Conservatives' humble address and laid public for us all to scrutinise. So Steve Reed or any of us can have a good old look at them and see what they might contain.
I want to change the subject completely in a minute or two, but Jacob, as a former Cabinet Minister, do you have any sympathy with poor old Steve Reed being sent out to talk about the story of the day and not being briefed at all?
He will definitely have been briefed. but the briefing he will be given is to give nothing away, which is always the impossible briefing. Yes, I had great sympathy with it. I was laughing whilst he was doing it because it's very hard to go out and give no answer to a story where everybody thinks that the answer is one that you're simply not willing to give. Because I'm afraid nobody believes that Morgan McSweeney has behaved properly about this. It's all too ridiculously convenient. And if you listen to the transcript or read the transcript, he doesn't correct the confusion that the police have about where the telephone is, as to whether it's in Westminster.
That's really odd.
That's really odd.
Where he is at the time.
Yeah.
I don't know, have you read the...
No, I haven't.
But do you think this is all a bit dodgy, Belle?
I think because of what's surrounding it, people are going to have concerns. I'm glad that the messages have shown up, because I think the idea that people couldn't get hold of the messages was something which was puzzling everybody who knows about how phones work and backup works, particularly on a government phone. You'd think they do something like that. But yeah, I think it's painful to watch because it doesn't look great, does it?
I do want to change the subject a bit, because you may have spoken about this in public, Jacob, but I'm interested to know what you think, as somebody who is a bit of a libertarian, what you thought about Nick Timothy making those, what many people thought was very inflammatory remarks about a gathering of Muslims in Trafalgar Square celebrating Iftar. I mean, many people think that, you know, he was sort of, you know, quasi-racist. What did you think?
I didn't think that, but it's not my view of the world. I think that people praying in public is something that I'm in favour of. I think it's a very odd world where it is now illegal to pray silently outside an abortion clinic, but it is perfectly legal for thousands of people to pray for the religion that is not the religion of this country in Trafalgar Square.
So you do take the libertarian
view
that
both should be legal.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure.
I'm not sure about what constitutes harassing people sometimes outside an abortion clinic. That's very different. But I thought those comments were actually quite disgusting what happens in... What happened in Trafalgar Square was a display of the diversity of our country. We are meant to practice religious freedom, or I hoped we were, and the idea that someone would make remarks like that, particularly given the time of year, just abhorrent to me, really.
But how do we get more, I don't know, mutual understanding, you know, mutual tolerance back into, you know, our normal debate? Because this was an episode that, I mean, it just divided people, upset people.
That's freedom of speech. That's fine. Nick took his view, and the people praying took their view. They're both allowed to do it. They're both allowed to say it. I think we're always trying to stop people saying things that we don't agree with. Freedom of speech requires people to be able to say things that you don't agree with.
It does, but freedom of speech comes with a responsibility, and that responsibility means that anything that you say shouldn't be a direct harm to anyone else, in the same way that we would prevent people from doing things...
But you wouldn't ban Nick Timothy from saying this, because I mean, you know, obviously lots of people were upset, but do you think he has a right to say it?
We have laws in this country that are, you know, equality laws that are meant to protect people from this type of language. As I said, freedom of speech comes with a responsibility. If what you are saying...
think he's crossed that line?
If what you are saying directly impacts or incites anything against another group, then you've really lost your right to say whatever you want. In the same way, if you committed any other sort of crime, you would have lost your right to liberty.
I'm sure Jacob...
But Nick Timothy clearly wasn't doing that.
I think you're disagreeing, because I, unfortunately, have to say goodbye. And it's a tearful farewell, because we're saying goodbye to historic television centre, but we'll see you again in a new studio with a thrilling new look. You can't be more excited than I am, obviously. Goodbye.